The earth cracked with a violent roar, and Thomas said, "The ground is alive, Emily, run." Ash sprayed into the air, turning daylight into twilight. Emily said, "The sky is bleeding fire." The forest trembled as birds scattered. Flames burst where soil split. Henry said, "The mountain is no longer sleeping." The silence shattered into screams of animals fleeing. Smoke rolled in waves, choking every breath. Emily said, "It feels like the end of the world." Lava burst, glowing rivers devouring roots and stone. Thomas gritted his teeth. "We must move before it swallows us." Sparks rained from the sky like burning hail. Shadows twisted in the inferno, as if the earth itself wanted them gone. The tremors deepened, the ground buckled beneath their feet, and Emily said, "The path is breaking apart." Thomas dragged her forward, his eyes wild with urgency. Henry shouted, "Follow the ridgeline." The earth roared again, splitting trees and sending stone flying. The air grew thicker, ash choking lungs, heat pressing like a fist. Thomas said, "We must stay ahead of the fire." Their bodies shook with exhaustion, yet fear kept them moving. Emily stumbled, coughing hard, but Thomas steadied her. Flames consumed the forest behind them. Henry said, "The mountain is chasing us." Ash darkened the sky into night. Sparks rained down like stars on fire. Emily said, "I cannot see." Thomas squinted, shielding her with his arm. Henry roared, "Trust the earth's slope." Their steps faltered on loose stone, feet sliding dangerously. The earth hissed with steam as molten cracks widened. Thomas said, "Hold steady, don't look back." Emily clung tightly, trembling. Their faces gleamed with sweat and soot. The mountain groaned with a deafening roar, louder than thunder. Henry glanced upward, fear flickering in his eyes. Emily whispered, "Will it ever stop?" The air boiled, a wind carrying firestorms across the forest. Trees cracked and fell, their trunks glowing from within. Thomas shouted, "Keep moving, faster." Emily's legs faltered, her strength thinning. Henry turned, yelling, "I will clear the way." He swung his staff against falling branches, sparks igniting the ground. The roar of the volcano was now a constant scream. Thomas clenched his jaw, pulling Emily through smoke. She whispered, "It feels like death is following." Henry said, "Then we must outrun it." A thunderous crack split the ground wide open, flames gushing upward. Thomas yanked Emily back, shouting, "Jump aside." She stumbled into his arms, clutching desperately. Henry cried, "This ridge will not hold." The three stood trapped between fire and abyss. Ash fell like black snow on their shoulders. Emily sobbed, "We cannot escape." Thomas shook his head fiercely, "We will survive." Henry's eyes glowed with grim determination. The ground beneath them shook violently again. Lava surged closer, spitting molten rock into the air. Ash still hung thick in the sky, but the eruption's roar softened into a low rumble. Emily coughed, her voice cracking, "I cannot breathe." Thomas lifted her into his arms, whispering, "You will not fall while I stand." Henry pressed forward, his staff steady, eyes scanning for safety. The forest behind them blazed like a torch, trees collapsing into molten pits. Emily clutched Thomas's shirt, trembling. She said, "The fire follows us." Thomas staggered, but did not falter. Henry shouted, "There is shelter near the ridge caves." Each step felt heavier as the smoke thickened. Emily whispered, "Promise me we will live." Thomas gritted his teeth, "I promise." The cave's mouth yawned before them, jagged stone promising momentary refuge. Henry said inside quickly. Thomas set Emily down gently against the cold rock wall. Her breaths came shallow, her lips cracked from heat. Emily murmured, "It feels safe, but the earth shakes still." The ground quivered faintly, reminding them safety was only an illusion. Thomas pressed a hand to her cheek, whispering, "Rest for a moment." Henry leaned against his staff, his eyes shadowed with worry. He said, "The mountain will not rest. We must keep strength for what lies ahead." Emily closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "I wish I could wake from this nightmare." Inside the cave, Silence pressed against them, broken only by distant thunder from the volcano. Thomas said, "We cannot stop for long." Emily touched his hand, whispering, "Without you, I would already be gone." He clenched her fingers, his eyes burning with determination. Henry stepped closer, voice low, "You carry more than your own life, Thomas. Her survival depends on your will." The weight of responsibility cut deeper than the heat outside. Emily smiled faintly despite the fear, saying, "You both are my strength." The cave trembled again, dust raining from the ceiling. Thomas said, "Then we will endure together." The distant howl of fleeing animals echoed faintly through the cave mouth. Emily stirred, her voice trembling. "They are running like us." Thomas brushed hair from her soot-streaked face, whispering, "All life flees the same fire." Henry leaned heavily on his staff, his eyes reflecting sorrow. He said, "This mountain does not choose its victims. It devours all without mercy." Emily's shoulders shook as she whispered, "I do not want to vanish in ash." Thomas pulled her closer, his voice firm, "You will not vanish." Henry's jaw tightened, his voice a vow, "I will see you both through this night, no matter the cost." Night fell heavy, but the volcano's fire lit the sky crimson. Thomas sat with Emily resting against his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the shifting glow outside. She whispered, "The fire is still awake." He kissed her forehead gently, murmuring, "Then we will stay awake too." Henry stood guard at the cave mouth, shadowed yet resolute. He said, "The mountain watches, waiting for weakness." The cave rumbled softly, reminding them of their fragile shelter. Emily whispered again, "I am afraid." Thomas gripped her hand tight. "Fear keeps us alive." Henry's gaze never wavered, his voice like stone, "Dawn will test us all." The dawn light never came, for the sky remained choked with ash. Thomas said, "It feels as if night has swallowed the world." Emily shivered beside him, whispering, "I hear something moving." From the shadows at the edge of the cave, glowing eyes pierced the darkness. Henry tightened his grip on his staff, his voice low, "We are not alone here." The growl of wolves echoed, hunger gnawing in their throats. Thomas pulled Emily closer, his heart racing. She whispered, "Even the beasts are driven mad by fire." Henry said, "We cannot wait for them to strike. We must drive them off." The wolves circled closer, their paws silent on ash and stone. Thomas whispered, "Stay behind me." Emily clutched his arm, fear burning in her eyes. Henry stepped forward, slamming his staff on the ground, sparks scattering from stone. He growled, "Back, creatures, the fire is not your ally." The wolves snarled, their ribs sharp with hunger. Emily gasped, "They are desperate like us." One lunged forward, teeth flashing in firelight. Thomas swung a broken branch, shouting, "Stay back!" The cave trembled under the sound of growls and the distant roar of the mountain. The first wolf lunged, its body a blur of muscle and teeth. Thomas struck with all his strength, the branch cracking against its flank. Emily screamed, "Thomas!" Henry raised his staff, bringing it down on another attacker's skull with a dull thud. The wolves yelped, retreating for a moment, but hunger drove them back. Emily pressed her hands to her mouth, whispering, "We cannot hold them forever." Thomas shouted, "Then we must make them fear us more than the fire." Henry's face hardened, his eyes fierce, "Fight with everything left in you." Blood stained the cave floor as the wolves snarled, circling again. Thomas breathed heavily, sweat dripping, his arms trembling from the blow. Emily whispered, "They will not stop." Her voice cracked under fear. Henry stepped forward, pushing them both back with his arm. He said, "Then I will end this." His staff rose high, glowing embers clinging to its wood. A wolf leapt, and Henry drove his weapon into its chest with a roar. Emily sobbed, "Henry," as the beast collapsed. Thomas shouted, "Keep fighting!" The cave echoed with battle cries, growls, and the relentless rumble of the volcano. At last the wolves fled, their howls fading into the burning forest outside. Silence returned, broken only by Thomas's ragged breath. He dropped a branch, his hands shaking. Emily clung to him, whispering, "We are alive, for now." Henry leaned on his staff, bloodied and weary, his face grave. He said, "This was only the beginning. Hunger will drive more beasts, and the fire has no end." Thomas nodded grimly, his voice low. "The mountain will not wait for us to find courage. We must move." Emily whispered, "But where can we run when the world itself burns?" The ground quieted for a brief moment, as if the volcano held its breath. Emily whispered, "It feels too still." Thomas glanced at Henry, his eyes uneasy. Suddenly, from deeper inside the cave, faint cries echoed. Henry froze, his face pale. Thomas said, "That is no animal." Emily clutched her chest, whispering, "It is a child's voice." The sound came again, soft but desperate. Henry muttered, "I thought this place was empty." Thomas stepped forward, torchlight trembling in his hand, and said, "Then someone is trapped." Emily's voice shook. "We cannot leave them." Thomas approached slowly, the child's frail body emerging from shadow. His face was streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror. Emily gasped, "He is only a boy." Henry's hand tightened on his staff, his jaw hard. He said, "Children should not be here. Something is wrong." The boy whispered, "The mountain took my family." His voice cracked, heavy with grief. Emily knelt, brushing hair from his face, saying, "You are safe now." Thomas stared at Henry and said, "We cannot abandon him." Henry's eyes flickered with sorrow. He whispered, "This boy is a ghost of what the fire has stolen." The cave shook, dust falling from the ceiling as the mountain groaned again. The boy clung to Emily, crying, "It hunts us." Thomas's face darkened. The fire itself drives everything into madness. Henry looked toward the trembling walls, his voice low, "The truth is crueler. The mountain does not hunt, it empties the world." Emily whispered, "He has no one left." Her tears streaked her ash-stained cheeks. Thomas lifted the boy, saying, "Then he will walk with us." Henry's tone was grave. "Every step will now weigh heavier. He is not just a survivor, he is the cost of all who perished." The group moved deeper into the cave, its walls glowing faintly with veins of molten rock. The boy whispered, "The fire speaks." Thomas frowned, asking, "What do you mean?" His small voice echoed, "It told me I am the last." Emily's face turned pale. She said, "The last of your family?" The boy shook his head, eyes empty. "The last of us." Henry's face hardened, his voice a whisper. "He is the last of his bloodline, an ending carried by one child." The silence after his words felt heavier than the mountain's roar. Emily sobbed, "We must not fail him." A hidden truth struck Thomas as he held the child. Survival was no longer about themselves. He whispered, "We carry the last of a kind." Emily tightened her grip on the boy, tears streaming silently. Henry's voice was steady, but filled with sorrow. "The mountain births extinction with every breath. This child is its proof." Thomas stared at the trembling cave ceiling, his voice fierce. "Then he must not fall, no matter the cost." Emily whispered, "If he dies, all memory dies with him." Henry closed his eyes briefly and said, "Nature does not care, but we must." The cave shook violently, walls cracking as molten veins burst with fire. Thomas shouted, "The mountain is tearing itself apart." Emily clutched the boy tightly, crying, "We cannot stay." Henry raised his staff and roared, "Run, or be buried alive." The boy sobbed, his voice small, "I am afraid." Thomas pulled them both forward, the ground splitting beneath their feet. Rocks crashed around them, glowing red with heat. Emily screamed, "The path is falling away." Henry turned, slamming his staff against collapsing stone to clear their way. He shouted, "This is our final chance to live." They burst from the cave mouth into a world of fire. The forest was gone, replaced by rivers of lava carving the land apart. Emily whispered, "The earth itself is dying." Thomas shielded the boy with his body as sparks rained down. Henry lifted his staff to the sky, his voice like thunder, "The mountain will not stop until it consumes everything." A deafening crack split the ridge beneath them, stones tumbling into fiery depths. Thomas shouted, "Move now!" Emily staggered, coughing, as flames licked at her dress. The boy screamed, "It is chasing us!" The volcano erupted with fury, spewing fire into the heavens. Thomas grabbed Emily's hand, dragging her through a collapsing ridge. Henry ran beside them, shouting, "The mountain is splitting open." Lava surged forward like a living beast. Emily screamed, "It is faster than us." The boy clung to Thomas's arm, sobbing. Rocks exploded around them, glowing fragments slicing through air. Thomas's voice broke with rage. "We will not be swallowed." Henry's face twisted in grim resolve. "One of us must hold the fire back, or we all fall." Emily cried, "No, we stay together." A wall of fire surged forward, chasing them across the ridge. Henry stopped suddenly, slamming his staff into the ground. Thomas shouted, "Henry, no!" The older man's voice thundered, "Go, I will hold it." Emily screamed, "You cannot!" Henry turned with fierce eyes, saying, "My strength ends here, but yours must carry him." The boy cried, "Do not leave us." Thomas pulled Emily away as lava thundered closer. Henry raised his staff high, his figure framed against the inferno. He roared, "Survive!" The fire swallowed his silhouette, his sacrifice blazing in their hearts. The ridge collapsed behind them, Henry gone in the blaze. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing. He gave everything. Thomas held the boy, his face grim and broken. He whispered, "His strength lives in us now." The volcano roared, ash raining in black sheets. The boy pressed his face to Thomas's chest, whispering, "I will remember him." Thomas's voice shook. "Then his sacrifice will not be in vain." Emily rose slowly, her eyes filled with firelight and grief. She said, "We must carry his legacy into the dawn." The mountain thundered, demanding more, but they pushed onward. Ash drifted through the broken sky like black snow, falling silently on a world remade in fire. Thomas stood with the boy pressed against his chest, his eyes raw with exhaustion. Emily whispered, "Henry's sacrifice saved us." Her words trembled like the air around them. Thomas nodded slowly, his voice carrying the weight of sorrow. He gave his last breath so that we might draw another. The mountain loomed above them, scarred and smoldering, smoke curling upward into a sky that refused to clear. The boy lifted his head, whispering, "He gave his life for mine." Emily reached out, her soot-streaked hand gently brushing the boy's back, and whispered, "Then you must live with his courage inside you." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, whispering fiercely, "We will carry him forward, in every step, in every breath, in every fight that remains." The silence afterward felt endless, the only sound the soft hiss of distant lava cooling into stone. They walked across ash-thickened ground, each step sinking into the powdery earth that once held forests. Emily said quietly, "This land will never breathe again." Her voice cracked as she gazed at the barren horizon. Thomas tightened his hold on the boy and replied, "Yet we must breathe, because he gave us that chance." The boy's frail voice broke, "I cannot walk far." Thomas bent low, whispering with steady fire, "Then I will carry you until your strength returns." Emily's eyes lingered on the distant horizon, where flames still flickered against the ash clouds. She whispered, "How many worlds has the mountain already devoured?" Thomas's gaze hardened, jaw set against despair. "Enough," he said, "to remind us that life is borrowed and never promised." They pressed forward, their bodies heavy but unyielding, the silence of the dead pressing close against their survival. The wind shifted across the wasteland, sweeping smoke through the skeletons of trees that once held birdsong. Emily paused, staring at the charred remains, whispering, "We walk through a graveyard." Her voice quivered like a broken string. Thomas placed his hand on her shoulder and answered, "Every step is a vow to remember what was lost." The boy pressed his face into Thomas's shoulder, his voice muffled, "I hear them crying." Emily's tears welled, and she whispered, "The voices of the dead still linger in the ash." Thomas clenched his teeth, whispering with fierce resolve, "Then we must carry them into tomorrow, because their silence demands our strength." A single raven circled overhead, its wings black against the haze of firelight, a living omen in a land that had nearly forgotten breath. Emily watched it soar, whispering, "Even death cannot silence every wing." They climbed a fractured hill that overlooked the Valley of Scars, where black rivers of cooled stone cut jagged lines across the earth. Emily's voice broke as she whispered, "The world has been carved open by fire." Thomas set the boy down gently, his legs trembling, and said, "But still it stands, and so do we." The boy gazed at the endless scars stretching toward the horizon, his voice small but steady, "I am the last. But I am not alone." Emily knelt beside him, brushing his hair softly, and whispered, "Your blood carries every soul that burned before you." Thomas placed his hand firmly on the boy's shoulder, his voice low and unyielding. "Together, we are more than fire can erase." The valley below glowed faintly, the volcano smoldering in the distance, both a grave and a promise of life's stubborn will. Night returned, but it carried a strange stillness, the air heavy with ash, yet tinged by faint starlight breaking through. They huddled together, the glow of embers flickering faintly in the distance. Emily whispered, "We survived, but survival feels like grief carved into flesh." Thomas wrapped an arm around both her and the boy, his voice steady but broken. "Survival is remembering, not forgetting." The boy lifted his head, gazing upward, and whispered, "The fire cannot burn the stars." Emily followed his gaze, eyes shimmering, whispering, "Even ash cannot bury the sky forever." Thomas pressed them closer, his voice strong against despair, "Dawn will come. And when it does, we will rise with it." Silence followed, but in that silence, there was both mourning and defiance, a final vow whispered into a sky that refused to be extinguished. At dawn, pale light fought its way through the ash-choked sky. Thomas stood at the ridge's edge, staring at the smoldering volcano, his face carved by grief and resolve. Emily whispered softly, "The mountain still breathes." The boy pressed against her side, whispering, "But I hear silence now." Thomas's eyes narrowed, and he said, "The silence carries the voices of those who gave everything." A faint echo of Henry's last cry drifted through his memory. Emily knelt, brushing soot gently from the boy's face, whispering, "He lives in us." The boy lifted his gaze to the dim light, whispering, "Then we are the fire's survivors." Thomas breathed deeply, his voice steady like stone. "Yes, and we must carry this truth until the world forgets the mountain's fury." They descended into the valley, every step crunching across brittle stone and cooled ash. Emily whispered, "The world feels emptied of its soul." Thomas replied, "It is not empty. It waits to be filled again." The boy squeezed Emily's hand tightly, whispering, "Will it always burn?" Thomas glanced at the fractured sky where faint light broke through and said, "Even fire must end. Nothing burns forever." Emily turned her head back toward the mountain, its plume a scar across the horizon. Her voice trembled, "Its shadow will follow us always." Thomas placed his hand firmly on her shoulder and whispered, "Then its shadow becomes part of us, not the end of us." The boy halted suddenly, his eyes fixed on something fragile amidst the ash. A tiny green shoot pushed through the blackened soil, trembling in the breeze. He whispered, "Life still dares." Emily knelt beside him, her voice breaking into tears, "Even the fire cannot kill all hope." Thomas's face softened for the first time, his voice low. "This is why we survive, not for ourselves, but for this." The boy touched the leaves carefully, whispering, "Then Henry did not fall in vain." Emily placed her hand gently on his shoulder, whispering, "No sacrifice is wasted when life rises again." The volcano rumbled faintly in the distance, not as a threat, but as a reminder that death and life are bound together. The valley spread wide before them, scarred by rivers of hardened lava stretching like black veins. Emily whispered, "This land will forever bear its scars." Thomas lifted the boy into his arms, whispering, "But scars mean survival, not defeat." The boy pressed his head against Thomas's chest and whispered, "I will live for those who burned before me." Emily's tears shone as she said softly, "And we will walk beside you always." The sky above began to clear, faint streaks of blue piercing through the gray veil. Thomas's voice rose, steady against despair. The fire took much, but it could not take us. Emily whispered, and as long as one survives, the story does not end. They reached the edge of the valley, where the earth opened to distant hills untouched by fire. Emily whispered, "The world will remember this silence." The boy lifted his head, whispering, "I will remember Henry." Thomas stared ahead, his voice firm, "Then the world will remember us because we endured." The wind carried their words across the silent ash fields, as if nature itself paused to listen. The volcano smoldered faintly in the background, a monument to fury and survival. Thomas whispered the last words like a vow carved into stone. "Life remains, even when the fire wants only ash." The silence that followed was eternal, and the echo of their survival would outlive the mountain's rage.